Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are checking out the iiyama GB2770QSU. As a 27-inch 1440p 165Hz IPS display, this really isn't anything we haven't seen before, and in fact, that sort of spec has been around on the market for a few years now. What makes this screen so special and so interesting though is the price point, as iiyama is actually able to offer the GB2770QSU for just £250 here in the UK. To put that into perspective, it wasn't actually that long ago, in mid-2017, that I myself personally paid over £550 for an AOC monitor with the same core spec. And yes, monitor prices have been dropping across the board since then, but this is still a particularly keen price, so surely iiyama has had to compromise somewhere. Well, if we kick off this review with a look at the design, I think this is the area where iiyama has cut the most corners. Not necessarily just in terms of the look of this display, as I do think it looks fine. The bottom chin is maybe a slightly bit thicker than we'd like, while the inset bezels also again slightly chunkier than what we'd expect on a premium display, but at this point in 2021, I think it is not a bad looking screen. The GB2770QSU is made entirely from plastic though, and that includes this V-shaped stand. Usually on most monitors we'd expect a plastic body but a metal stand. Here everything is entirely plastic. Now I definitely wouldn't say it feels poorly put together, but it is overall quite light and just doesn't feel as premium as a more expensive monitor, as demonstrated here by the amount of wobble you see when pressing the various OSD functions. Of course, once you've got your monitor set up, you're unlikely to be touching it that much anyway, so it's not really a big deal. But again, like I say, compared to a more premium monitor, you can tell that this isn't the most expensive panel. I do actually like a couple of things in particular about the stand though, and one is it actually came pre-attached to this panel. So that's 4 screws iiyama has done for you, meaning it's just one less thing to worry about as you take the monitor out of the box. Secondly, there's even a small cable management hook at the bottom of the stand just to make things that bit tidier with your video input and power cables. It's a small touch, but it definitely helps. Speaking of the stand, we do get a good amount of ergonomic adjustments. That starts with height adjust up to 130mm, and we also get tilt from 18 degrees up to 3 degrees down, as well as even 90-degree pivots, so you can actually rotate the screen and put it in portrait mode if you want to. Now it is worth making clear that the monitor only pivots clockwise, so if you turn it anti-clockwise, absolutely nothing will happen, but I still think that's a good inclusion. The only thing really missing here is swivel, but like we already said, this monitor is light enough so you could easily move it around if you really needed to. And if you want to add your own custom stand or wall mount for instance, VESA 100 mounting is supported. As for the ports then, this is another area where things aren't quite as fully featured as we might expect. We start off with our 2 display inputs, so there's only one HDMI 2.0 and just one DisplayPort 1.4, while there's also a 3.5mm audio jack and a 2-port USB 3.0 hub. If you're only going to be connecting the GB2770QSU to a single PC, then I think this array of selections will be absolutely fine, but only 2 video inputs and no USB as well, at this point in 2021, could definitely be a drawback for some buyers. Back to the front of the display though, here we can see 6 small buttons used to control the OSD. If you saw my recent review of the AOC U28G2XU, you will know I am really not a fan of these fiddly buttons and would much prefer a joystick. However, to iiyama's credit, they have printed what each button does in a small white piece of text on the bezel itself, so you do get a kind of a more clear idea of what you're doing when you're fiddling around, but still, this again for me is another cost-cutting measure and I really would have preferred to see a joystick. The actual OSD itself is decent as well. It's not the best looking menu system I've ever seen, but you've got 10 main areas to tweak pretty much everything you could need. Granted, a few gamer-centric features are missing, like an FPS overlay or a crosshair, but it definitely gets the job done. We should also point out that currently iiyama doesn't offer any Windows-based software, so you can quickly tweak some various monitor settings over USB, for instance, a feature which I usually like to see, but again, considering the price point, I can understand why we're not getting that here. That is basically it for the design though, so now let's move on to talk about the panel itself, starting off with our Spyder X colorimeter testing. Here, things are looking good straight away, as we are seeing 100% sRGB coverage out of the box, along with 88% Adobe RGB and actually 97% DCI P3 coverage, so that is definitely a good start. Next up is overall brightness, and here I was actually quite surprised to see the GB2770 QSU exceeding 500 nits at 100% brightness, which is especially impressive considering iiyama only claims up to 400 nits for the panel. That is definitely a very good result then, although the minimum brightness of 87 nits could be better. A contrast ratio of 1170:1 though is another great result for an IPS panel, particularly one of this price point. That said, the white point could be better, coming in somewhat cool at between 7300K to 7600K. Lastly, out of the box colour accuracy is also solid, with an average delta E of 1.54 and a maximum of 2.87. Now that's not jaw-droppingly good, but it is very decent all round for a display of this class, and we actually saw this improve even more once calibrated, with a new average delta E of just 0.93 and a maximum of 1.81. For what is really a gaming display at £250 no less, this really is highly impressive stuff. Let's talk about gaming though, and I actually want to start off in kind of more general terms. Right now, I really do think 27-inch 1440p is the sweet spot for gaming. You get noticeably more detail than a 1080p panel with great pixel density, and while it's obviously not as sharp as 4K, it is significantly easier to push 1440p at higher frame rates than it is at 4K, so you don't need a beast of a GPU to run this monitor. Of course, that does apply to other 27-inch 1440p panels as well, so it's not specific to this iiyama one, but it is definitely a good place to be. Response times are also a strong area for the GB2770 QSU, with next to no motion blur visible. That's because the screen defaults to the third overdrive setting out of the box, with a choice of up to 5 modes plus turning overdrive off, which is definitely better than a lot of other monitors I've tested recently. In my experience, the third setting is actually the best, offering absolutely minimal ghosting without any visible overshoot either. Settings 4 and 5 do introduce much more visible overshoot though, while the ghosting is also more obvious on settings 1 or 2. On the third setting though, the default one, I had a great time flying about in Guardians of the Galaxy, and of course I whipped out a bit of Call of Duty, which was feeling very fast and fluid on this screen. On a similar note, latency is absolutely not an issue for the GB2770 QSU. All of this testing here is measured with Nvidia's LDAT tool, and compared to the Corsair Xeneon, another 1440p 165Hz display, latency is basically the same, with just 0.3 milliseconds in it. In any case, I had no issues with input lag. It's overall a fast and responsive monitor, so a definite thumbs up from me. You may also be wondering about G-Sync, as officially this screen is only certified as AMD FreeSync Premium Pro, so it hasn't been officially certified by Nvidia as G-Sync compatible. That said, I did all of my testing with G-Sync enabled in Nvidia's control panel using an RTX 3090, and I have to say the experience was flawless. There was no flickering or any other weird behaviour that you can sometimes see, so G-Sync worked fine up to 165Hz for a lovely and smooth experience. We do also get typically strong viewing angles as we would expect from an IPS panel. That said, there was maybe a touch more colour shift, with the colours getting a bit more muted as I moved around the screen than I would have typically expected from, say, a more premium IPS panel, but it really wasn't bad at all and honestly did not bother me. I think the fact that this is only a 27-inch monitor definitely helps, as you're almost certainly going to be sat directly in front of it, in which case it looks absolutely perfect. That said, I did have a negative area in terms of the panel, and that was with backlight bleed. So I had a couple of hotspots on this display, one towards the right hand edge and another in the top left corner. When actually playing games, as you can see here in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I really can't say that it bothered me at all, but when any cinematic cutscenes came in with the black bars on the top of the bottom, there I really did notice the bleed and it became quite distracting. Of course, there will be some variance from panel to panel, but I can really only go off what I experienced, and on my sample there was some noticeable backlight bleed, so that is definitely an area which could be improved. I wouldn't say it was a deal breaker, but definitely could be better. Lastly then, the GB2770QSU does also feature Display HDR 400 certification, but anyone who's seen any of my monitor reviews will know I really don't consider this real HDR. In actual fact, this panel does have a decent brightness out of the box, but there's no local dimming. Even the relatively decent contrast for the IPS panel here isn't enough, so you're just really not getting a proper HDR experience. That said, considering the price point, I'm really not going to hold that against this screen. For monitors which are more like £500, £600, £700 there, I really do want to see a proper HDR experience, but on this £250 display, I'm not really that fussed. Overall then, it is safe to say I'm very impressed with the iiyama GB2770QSU. Like we said at the very start of the video, iiyama's really not trying to do anything new or push any boundaries with this screen. That said, 1440p panels are getting more and more popular, and this is a very good option to have. It's fast, the colours look great, and most importantly, it is very well priced at just £250. If you're looking to upgrade from maybe an older 1080p panel without breaking the bank, this is definitely well worth a look. As we've pointed out though, it is not perfect, with a relatively meagre I/O selection, a fairly cheap feel to the overall build quality, and like we just said, there is some noticeable backlight bleed on my sample. Still, I honestly wouldn't consider any of those issues to be deal breakers, and at £250 you're getting a fast, good looking and responsive display. Honestly, I'd be happy to use this as my own daily driver going forward, so I like to think that is a pretty decent recommendation. Anyway guys, that really is going to do it for this review, so if you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do hit subscribe and ding that notification bell if you haven't already, and why not come tell me what you think over on our Discord server, which is linked in the description. While you're there, you can check out a link to our merch store, and you can even consider backing us on Patreon, where you can get access to some exclusive giveaways and see some of our content early. That's it for this one though guys, I'm Dominic Full Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.